Hello everyone, this is Pal Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to be going over my October forecast for the US, including Alaska and Canada. So if you're new to the channel, click the subscribe button and notification bell to get all my daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right to it. Here is your overall temperature sea surface anomalies for the beginning of October. You can definitely see out here in the equatorial Pacific, they really cooled down out here, but notice the much cooler waters out here towards the eastern part of the Pacific. Here's your graph right here, so you can definitely see we're well below average, a good 2 to 3 degrees below average in this region. We also got some very warm waters out here into the North Pacific. That is actually filtered in along the coast here too. A couple weeks ago, this was all colder waters. That has now filled the gap, and that's one of the reasons why the Pacific Northwest has come back with the rains, and I think that's just going to continue as we go deeper into October. But look at all the warm temperatures out here in the Atlantic. The Atlantic basin's really warm. We've got the Gulf of Mexico, much of the Caribbean, and even along the eastern seaboard, you can definitely see we've got well above average temperature sea surface anomalies out here. So I am expecting another active October, and we'll go over that as well. So now let's take a look at the overall 500 millibar for the next week in October. So here's the setup. So as the polar jet becomes more active, it's going to be able to take advantage of some of that colder air that's going to be building up here in Alaska. That's going to develop a trough and dig it into the western part of the US and really bring those cooler temperatures for that region. And then we also have the ridge blocked over southeast Canada. That's going to bring the well above average temperature anomalies for them. And as we go into week 2, that trough just amplifies even further and brings much of that colder air, even some snow, going to be flying by then. But we're talking rain chances coming back for California, as much for the West Coast, as this ridge will continue to be locked over southeast Canada. Now, the idea is as we go deeper into October, this trough will just shift just a tad bit further eastward as we go deeper into October, and this ridge will start to retreat a little bit further off to the north as we go deeper in October. So let's take a look at Alaska. So this is where all some of the cold air is originating from. Now here's the overall temperature anomalies for Alaska for the next 7 days, and they've got some below average temperatures, especially for central and southern Alaska, filtering in which much cooler conditions as we have a developing system that's going to come off the Gulf of Alaska to really pull in some colder anomalies. And this weekend, they're actually expecting some pretty good snow amounts in that region over the next week. So much of Alaska is really going to be seeing some good snows, anywhere from 3 to 10-inch snowfalls. Coming into this weekend, going into early next week in that region. And as we go deeper into the month, for the entire month of October, I think we'll have waves and waves of cold spreading over. So overall, we're going to be seeing some of those temperature anomalies below average, a good 3 to 5 to 7 degrees below average, especially for the central and southern regions. It's going to be somewhat more or less normal, but overall, we're expecting a much colder October for the Alaskan regions. And this is going to set the stage. It's going to bring some cooler conditions, and if not colder conditions, for much of the West Coast into October as well. So let's take a look at the overall snowfall. And this is kind of an average mean for Alaska over the course of the month. And you can definitely see they've got some snow over the course of the week, but I think that just continues with sporadic snow chances coming in over the course of the month. So overall, a good 10 to 15 inches is not out of the question. These are just means snowfall, but that's going to set the stage for a pretty good snowpack and going to be building some of that colder air as these troughs take advantage of that cold. It's going to have less time to modify as it filters in into portions of Canada there, and especially off the west coast. So that's why we're going to be seeing some of those colder anomalies kind of filtering in off the western part of the U.S. With the snowpack really starting to develop over Alaska. So let's take a look at Canada. I spread it out in kind of 3 quadrants for Canada. This is your western quadrant, so more or less western Canada. Over here in the British Columbia area, we're going to be seeing those below average anomalies with that trough digging in. That's going to filter in into Washington and Oregon, but you should see over the next week to the middle of the month of October, those temperature anomalies below average for much of British Columbia, and that will spread into portions of Alberta as we get deeper into that second week of October, and as we filter a little bit further off into the central part of Canada. That's when you're going to be seeing the temperatures start to modify, kind of flip the opposite direction, because there's the snowfall for British Columbia as well as Alberta, over the first half of October, and that's going to be developing, taking advantage of that trough. It's going to be extended off the west coast, and with the snow in Alaska, that's just going to filter into British Columbia and even dump some heavier snows into portions of the Northwest territories of the U.S., and we'll go over that as well. But let's take a look at the overall central part of Canada. So as the ridge will go from a different swing of below average anomalies to well above average anomalies, and these are your average means for central Canada, parts of Saskatchewan and Manitoba here, of these 4 to 5, even 6 to 8 degrees. Now these are your average highs and your average low temperatures, so this is pretty well above average temperature anomalies overall, with that ridge locked and loaded over place, basically over the Dakotas and over Minnesota, over the Great Lakes here, as this ridge will start to just dominate over the top, bringing those well above average temperature anomalies. And as you can imagine, there's not going to be much snow that's going to be able to fall in that region. But as you get well to the north, well away from the Canadian border, yeah, so you could see some snowfall. But overall, it's going to be a fairly warm October for much of central Canada. And then as we go into the eastern part, now again, that ridge is still locked in low to over southeast Canada. So I do expect those well above average temperature anomalies to extend north of the Great Lakes, north of the mid-Atlantic states, into portions of Ontario here, into Quebec, with those above average temperature anomalies for October. And then of course the snowfall, not much snow underneath that ridge of high pressure. You'd have to go well to the north of Canada to be able to see any snow going to be flying over that region. I think we have a pretty strong polar vortex currently right now, and I do expect that to continue to remain strong for much of October, keeping that that really cold polar air up to the polar regions. I think that's where it's going to stay, at least for now, for October. But those troughs are going to be still digging in on the western part of the U.S., bringing those well below average temperature anomalies for them. Now let's take you to the other side and take you to the tropics, because I am expecting, with that ridge going to be dominating over the southeastern parts of Canada, that's going to be able to lower the pressures underneath. And as we get into that October area, these are the favored tracks for tropical development. And you always look for the Caribbean, because the Caribbean's got the most highest sea surface temperatures. I showed you this. The MDR regions typically dies down by then, but as we get closer to home, as we get closer into Caribbean, these are some of your warmest sea surface temperatures, not just at the surface, but deep down in the ocean as well. So if something does develop, this is basically the favored track of where it typically might go, because we've got fronts coming down in the U.S. that more or less kind of puts Texas out of play as far as maybe a hit or a landfall. You're still going to be able to get a lot of rain, because I do expect, at least along the coastline here. But as far as like tropical development or possibly a tropical type landfall, this would be your more favored areas, and that red zone would take it up through the Caribbean, through the Caymans, through Florida, and possibly run it up the East Coast. That is your most favored track. So this is definitely something we're going to be looking out for, because I am expecting another active October in the tropics. So now let's take a look at the overall rainfall for the next 10 days for the U.S. With that trough digging in, we've got above average precipitation for much of the Pacific Northwest and Washington and Oregon. But even California is going to be able to get in the action with some rain going to be included for you guys. With that trough digging in, that's going to be able to tap into some moisture. So we desperately need some rain in California, and I do feel you're going to be getting that as we get into that, deeper into the first week of October, especially the second week, and that'll filter in into the interior regions. Much of this will actually fall in the form of snow because it's going to be cold enough. We're drying out over the next couple of days in Texas after they had all that rainfall over the portions of the Southwest and Texas over the last couple of days. But I am expecting, with an active tropics, look at the Caribbean, look at all that precipitation down here in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, well above average rainfall for them. And then up the East Coast as well. So I am expecting well above average precipitation for much of the Southeast into Florida and along the East Coast and the Carolinas and much of New York and much of the Northeast as well. And of course, you've had a very wet time over the last couple of months. And I think that just going to continues for you guys in that region. So let's take a look at the snowfall, because it is going to be cold enough to snow for the next 2 weeks in October, and it's even going to get colder as that trough will be shifting further off into the central part of the U.S. But before then, we've got some snow to talk about that's going to be flying in the higher elevations of Washington and Oregon and the Sierra Mountains of California, getting into Nevada here, into Idaho, into Montana, and especially Wyoming, and getting into portions of Colorado and Utah. Well, that's why I expect the majority of the snowfall to be flying, especially the first half of October. So let's take a look at my official outlook for October. I'm expecting some chillier and wet conditions for much of the Pacific Northwest into Washington and Oregon, and much colder conditions than what you've experienced as of late for much of California and Nevada, and to Idaho, getting into portions of Montana and to Utah, as well as even into portions of Phoenix. I'm expecting colder conditions, and even could have some snowfall flying in Flagstaff by the end of the month. Is not out of the question. And as we shift towards getting into Montana and parts of the Dakotas, with that trough, and my thinking of the trough going to be shifting just a tad bit further off into the east, especially as we get into that second half of October. That's where I feel you're going to start getting into the action and some of the colder temperatures by then in this region, in the blue shaded area. So once we get down into this region out here into New Mexico and getting into portions of Colorado, getting into the panhandle of Oklahoma, panhandle of Texas, that's going to, I think, bring more of your just normal fall-like temperatures that I think you're just going to be experiencing in that region. So well to the north of that ridge of high pressure locked and loaded over the top, I do feel for much of Minnesota and the Great Lakes and the northern interiors here, you're going to more or less have an endless summer with those well above average temperature anomalies continuing to be active for your region out here in the red shaded areas. And as we get a little bit further off into the south in this lighter brown shaded areas, I do feel still going to be a lot warmer, but just not nearly as high as the temperature anomalies as you're going to be experiencing to the north in the Great Lakes. So I still feel into much of Missouri, into much of the Ohio Valley, getting into portions of Tennessee and Kentucky area, those areas, we're going to be seeing warmer conditions. But along the coast with an active tropics and those warm sea surface temperatures, I do feel you're going to be seeing some of those heavier rains, especially along the coastal regions for much of Texas, going into Corpus, maybe San Antonio, into Austin, getting in, especially along into Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, into Florida. This is going to be more your favorite track for tropical type systems as they as they come through through the Carolinas and up, especially up along the East Coast. I mean, I showed you these well above average temperature sea surface anomalies up here, and I think that's just going to just add into insult to injuries as we have that active this wave of energies coming your way. So I do feel, yes, continued well above average precipitation anomalies filtering in back for portions of the Northeast. Now, once you get up into Maine, I think a lot of that precipitation will tend to kind of shut off and die off. So I try to come up with a word, I think, cozy for, Maine. I say, hey, how does Maine feel in October? But it feels pretty cozy, right? So yeah, I think you're just going to have more or less normal type conditions. I think you're going to be experiencing and enjoying those fall-like colors up here in that region for a good chunk of October. So I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely leave your comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update where I protect you before and after the storm.